That's one of the things that I really dislike about the LBM space, and I think that's been the strategy in the past. Is you lose a customer, and if it's based off of price, then I'm gonna lower my price and try and get that customer back, and it becomes a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And I think that the LBM space in general has become more sophisticated in realizing, listen, if we just drop price to get that same price-driven customer back, eventually that customer will go back to the other supplier for a lower price. And so we don't play that game.
Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm gonna keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Well, hello there, friends. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartman, founder, CEO of the Behind Your Back Sales Company, where it's our mission to help you sell more, faster, at higher margins, have more fun doing it. As for this podcast, we talk about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in the construction industry. Quick shout out to our sponsor, Capital One Trade Credit. If you are interested in growing sales, increasing cash flow, decreasing risk, and leveraging a powerful platform, digital platform, to make it easier for your customers to buy from you, well, my friends, I think you might want to check out Capital One Trade Credit. Simply Google Capital One Trade Credit and see if it's a fit for you. Well, I'm thrilled to bring to you today my conversation with Mr. Greg Templeman. He is the president at Sunpro. Now, Sunpro is a family-owned and operated company with 16 locations throughout Utah and Idaho. They began in 1938 as Utah Service, as it was called originally, and it was purchased by W.W. Clyde, founder of the W.W. Clyde heavy civil construction firm. In 1999, Utah Services merged with J&J Lumber and Building Supply under the name Sunrock Building Materials and later renamed Sunpro. They've been around for over 80 years, serving largely Utah and Idaho. Surely then, Greg Templeman, president now at Sunpro, is from Utah, right? I think not. He was raised in Toronto, studied at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and then lived in Siberia. That's right, Siberia for 2 years. Obviously something I had to dig into and learn more about. Greg earned his MBA at Willamette University and began his corporate career working for TMP Worldwide. There's a couple brands you may recognize, Flipdog.com and Whizbang, with an exclamation point, Labs. Yes, that was a real thing. He also worked for Merrill Lynch, worked for Weyerhaeuser for 5 years, then worked for International Paper, working in Russia, the Ukraine, Middle East, and Eastern Europe, until coming to Sunpro, where he's been for the past 7+ years. And for the past 5 of those, he has been president. Now, as you will hear, Greg is a great interview, very articulate, very smart, and really enjoyed talking to him. We talk about 2 things specifically. We talked about behavior-based pricing, because I think Sunpro is doing something that very, very few dealers are doing in the industry, which is thinking differently about the pricing that they're giving to customers, but in a way that is much deeper than just simple customer stratification. And we also talk about some leadership principles based on his time in Siberia and living in so many different cultures, and also being raised in Toronto, speaks fluent French, also speaks Russian. So from a linguistic and cultural perspective, he's got something really unique to share with you. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Greg Templeman, president at Sunpro. So, Mr. Greg Templeman, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Bradley. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. And flashing back several months ago when we were together at the LBM Strategies event in Boston, I had a couple conflicts and I was juggling some work and I stepped out, and unfortunately I missed your presentation. But when I came back, there was a buzz and it was everything everyone was talking about at that event. And I was extremely curious. So then when we got on the phone, you had mentioned a comment that you were really into and focusing on, and what you were speaking about at the event was kind of behavior-based pricing and removing emotion from pricing. And I immediately was fascinated, something that we talk a lot about. And I try to think a lot about on how we come up with our own pricing, let alone working with clients. I wonder if you maybe can back up a little bit in your career. Take us at Sunpro. What happened, or was there a defining event or something that happened that said, okay, we need to start thinking differently about the pricing model and how we do everything when it comes to pricing and customer stratification?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and I can't take credit for all of Sunpro's pricing strategy. In one way, I inherited it. We've certainly enhanced it, and I have a team of people that work on pricing with some regularity. But when we migrated, and this predates me, from one ERP to BizTrack. BizTrack's the ERP that we use right now, which is commonly used in the LBM space. At that time, there was some motivation to develop a more objective pricing strategy. And so when we migrated to BizTrack, that was probably, I think you're 10 years ago now, maybe a little bit more. And so it's that old, but as time has passed, we've refined that the pricing strategy. And so that's kind of the history behind it. It was changing ERPs.
Okay.
Let's get better at pricing. Sunpro used to be known as Sunrock Building Materials. We rebranded, renamed a few years ago. And at the time, again, predates me, Sunrock Building Materials was known as kind of like the Walmart of the lumber and building material space. We were low priced. And in some cases, depending on who you talk to, low service too. And so we improved our service because obviously you can't demand a higher price unless the value is there from the customer's perspective. So we improved our service, and that kind of aligned with our ERP transition. And that's when we got into the details of pricing.
Got it. Well, I'll set the table for you here. One of my favorite books, it's this book called The Art of Profitability by Adrian Slywatsky. And I don't remember where I stumbled upon it, but it's a book that I'm probably one of my most gifted books to clients or friends. And it's one that I try to read every kind of 12 to 24 months. And there's a quote early on, and it says, "To succeed in business, you have to have a genuine, honest to goodness interest in profitability. And most people don't. That's all there is to it." And I think this conversation at this point in time is interesting because we are living in the land of plenty right now, and things are really good. And however, we know, again, depending on when you identify kind of the start of this bull run coming out of the Great Recession, is had a really strong 10, 11, maybe some markets even 12 years of this. So I think really focusing on the profitability measures. How do we do it? How do we look at cost to serve? How do we think about stratification of our customers? And you guys are all in. And from any of the folks that I've talked to, I think real leaders in our space here, maybe just talk about some of the factors that are involved as you start thinking about, hey, how we offer what pricing to what customers. Not all customers are created equal. We're going to be transparent about that. These are the factors we look at. Maybe that is a diving in point. Maybe take the baton there and run with it.
Yeah. You can pick as many metrics as you want, and they can be as varied as you want, but we chose to pick 4 metrics. Okay. And so there are 4 measurements by which we categorize our customers. And one is volume, and I probably recommend you always use volume because you want to make sure you take care of your biggest customers. But volume, cost of service, which is somewhat subjective. Are you a high maintenance or a low maintenance customer? Cost of credit, which can be objective. You can, obviously pull a credit score or look at their past payment history with previous vendors. And then product mix, meaning do you just buy lumber from us, or do you buy across all of the product categories that Sunpro is involved in? So you buy lumber, trusses, millwork and doors, insulation, garage doors. And within those 4 categories, we have 3 different kind of options to pick. So for example, volume, we'll say, are you a high volume customer, a medium volume customer, or a low volume customer? So you have 3 options in that volume category. And then the other ones also have three options, right? Are you high maintenance, low maintenance, or mid maintenance? And on the mix, it's only 2. We'll have, do you buy just one product category from us, or do you buy across multiple product categories? And we've kind of strided it 2 to start, but underneath those 2, we'll separate it into, is 80% of your business in one product category, then it kind of gives you a different tier. If you're, 80% or if 80% is in one product category, it's a lesser price. If it's less than 80%, it's a better price. So you can striate even in those subcategories. But to keep it simple, we have 4, and in those 4 is typically 3 different options. And so we assign each of our customers a pricing profile. So that grouping, it creates a pricing profile for our customers, and they drive it. We're very transparent. We let them know this is your pricing profile right now. The best profile would be HLLM, meaning you're high volume, low cost of credit, low cost of service, and then you have a mix. You're buying multiple product categories. You can do an M20, M30, but we'll get into stuff like that. So,
okay.
And as you treat us, we'll make adjustments to that pricing profile. And so, we can pull up, and we're very objective and data driven. We'll pull up, the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or a year, their payment history with us. And if they're paying within terms and they're low cost of credit, then it stays. If they're not paying within terms, then we'll make an adjustment maybe from L to M. So it's like your medium cost of credit right now, or if they're way outside of terms, then it goes down to H, which is high, and that will affect their pricing. So their pricing effectively goes up, not significantly, but marginally because of their behavior and how they pay us, right? The same can be applied to volume. If your volume was at this point, let's say over $1 million and you drop below it, and maybe it's the market side, we can work through things like that. But if it's, now you're buying from a different supplier, or that supplier is getting more volume than Sunpro is, then we'll obviously make an adjustment to price, which is, to be honest, Bradley, counterintuitive, right? You're thinking, well, we lost some business to another LBM dealer. Let's lower our price and try and get it. But that's one of the things that I really dislike about the LBM space, and I think that's been the strategy in the past. Is you lose a customer, and if it's based off of price, then I'm gonna lower my price and try and get that customer back, and it becomes a race to the bottom.
Yeah.
And I think that the LBM space in general has become matured, more sophisticated, and realizing, listen, if we just drop price to get that same price-driven customer back, eventually that customer will go back to that other supplier for a lower price. And so we don't play that game. We hope that Sunpro's value is coupled in our service, the quality of products that we have to offer, and then that we have some differentiators that try and make us separate from our competition in the space. And people, our customers value that, and therefore will pay for it. So our pricing is right there at market. We're no longer the lowest. We're not typically the highest. We're kind of right there in the middle. Some customers might say we're higher because maybe their profile is reflective of a higher pricing profile based off of their behavior. But the whole point of pricing profiles is to have the customers drive their pricing. So you can get the very best pricing if you pay us within terms, if you're a lower maintenance customer, and that can be, again, very subjective if you're high volume and you're buying across all product categories that Sunpro has to offer.
Yeah, so obviously those are very objective, pretty black and white. We can all substantiate, my guess would be the vast majority of those. Is there any other secret, double secret probation, off the record, subjective part that says, hey, they got a fantastic reputation? And I'm thinking back to my Pulte days. Folks would come in if they were new, or maybe they spun off and no one knew who they were. If they could come in as a calling card and say, yeah, maybe this is largely going to be for cash flow. We're not going to make a whole ton of profits, but I can go into anyone else and saying, I'm the exclusive provider of X with Pulte. Is there any part of this that isn't strictly objective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to answer it 2 different ways. One is we do have strategic customers.
Okay.
And they have a pricing profile, but the pricing profile doesn't, it's not applicable to them, meaning they've grown so much with us over time that the profile doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We trust them, and so they go off profile. There's only a handful of customers like that. Me and my executive team, we manage the pricing there.
Okay.
And they typically move from the pricing profile to a blend, which is a completely different differentiator for Sunpro, but we manage them, right? So they're off profile. To answer the question the second way, and you mentioned Pulte, a national home builder, and we don't have any problem. We like national home builders, but we're primarily in Utah and Idaho. And D.R. Horton's been here for a while, but the other nationals aren't here.
Yeah,
they're coming quickly. We've made a kind of a strategic and deliberate decision to target the mid-size local or regional builder. So, a big builder in our market would be like, Ivory Homes is at the top of the construction monitor, and we do business with them and some other regional specific to Utah and Idaho builders. And not that we don't want to do business with the nationals in the future, but typically the nationals are more aligned with the big national LBM provider. And there used to be 4, and now there's one, it's BFS. And so that's kind of probably where they should be buying their materials from. At some point, maybe we'll grow to a point where the mid-size and kind of larger regional builders, we supply all of them, and then we have to look more at the nationals, but we don't really target the national builders.
Okay.
We think that's kind of more BFS's territory.
Yeah. When we were talking before, I was flashing back to this experience I had. I'd been in the field for 8 years and built a lot of homes, and then came into purchasing, was just learning the ropes. And I was meeting with a flooring contractor we had really good relationships with. And I remember looking at the pricing, which we didn't really look at the pricing much when we were on the construction management. We were focused on the production. And I just said, hey, this could be a dumb question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Are we getting your best pricing right now? And I was going through a lot of meeting all these people, all these different accounts. And the vast majority of them were just like, yes, of course. Yes, we love you. And they were like, no, not even close. And hard stop. Dramatic pause. And I sat back and I said, can I ask how we get your best pricing? He said, I'm thrilled you asked the question. And he went through and he detailed all the things that we do that made us, he didn't say cost to serve, but that's what we were talking about. And what I loved is having kind of the experience on the production side. I went back and I said, okay, so you're telling me if we make the commitment to change A, B, and C, you can theoretically come down on pricing in these, kind of in these tiers. But it allowed us to kind of bet on ourselves. However, there were some other people when I was telling that story within our office they thought it was offensive. It was outrageous. Yeah. What happens when you have this conversation about pricing profiles and people do get emotional? Because I have to imagine that's part of the training you give to salespeople, because that has to be a somewhat common reaction.
Yeah, 2 things. I mean, first of all, this program is useless unless you update the profiles, right? So you can put profiles in place, but unless you have and our structure is such that the sales rep and his or her manager need to be auditing those profiles with some regularity, at least on a quarterly basis, right? Okay. So the profiles need to be up to date. And if they're not up to date, then you can see a customer getting really upset saying, wait, why does my profile say this when my terms are in fact this? So it's on us to keep them updated. And secondly, I don't ever want to be in a situation where I have to talk to one of our big strategic customers and they say, hey, listen, my friend just started his own home building company, and I find out his pricing is the same as mine or even better. And that should never happen at Sunpro. And I know it's happened back in the Sunrock building materials days when we had migrated to this new objective pricing, kind of pricing profile for each customer. I haven't had any experiences where I've had a customer contact me and say, listen, my pricing seems unfair compared to this person. Now, obviously, people don't generally talk about pricing, but in the event they do, as the president of Sunpro, I feel relatively safe that those conversations they'll say that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Meaning, I'm building 150 or 200 homes this, with Sunpro the last few years. This guy's building, 10, and his price should be a lot higher, and it is a lot higher, compared to what's going on. And so, again, keeping it updated and then making sure that we're never in an embarrassing situation with pricing. And that's why I like the idea of when you're objective and you're saying, customer A, this is our profile. This is how we operate with pricing. This is your profile. And we're always generous at the beginning, saying, listen, we'll give you a better profile. We trust that you're going to be a bigger volume customer, that you're going to not be high maintenance, and your cost of credit is pretty objective, right? So we'll give you a favorable profile. But if those things don't hold up, then we will make adjustments to the profile. And typically we like to involve the customer in those kind of conversations. And we have, and they stick around. They say, no, I get it. I mean, that's fair. You're not being subjective with me, except in cost of service. That can be a little bit subjective, and we work through those things. I mean, it could be a market cycle. It could be their financing got tight, and so they weren't able to pay us within terms or whatever it is. But as long as we're just able to say, these are the objective parameters, we're both kind of, this is your input, this is our input. Let's look at this and kind of remove, any kind of emotion that you or I might have as supplier and customer.
Yeah, what we also found, and I'm guessing you guys found this as well, is that when our suppliers challenged us to operate in a different way that made things more simplistic, one point of contact, fewer orders, fewer people calling in, it often made us better and had us rethink, are we aware that on the same job site, we have 3 different people calling in multiple products around the same time every morning? we don't really know that until supplier kind of raises his hand and says, hey, you guys are doing some dumb things. You're gonna phrase that in a nicer way than I did. Have you thought about this? And then we go back and we're like, really? This is what we do? And I think if you are open to that and you have the culture on both sides of that supplier builder relationship that are open to improvements, and that's where you can really start seeing some efficiency and just less stress and frustration as well.
Yeah, I love your example. I use the word partnership. And what's interesting is I've been in situations where a customer will use the word partner with me, but it's very self-serving, right? Hey, Greg, we're partners. I mean,
Yes.
come on. Okay, what are you going to do for me? And so it's a little less sincere or maybe more one-sided. And we're probably guilty of saying, hey, we're partners, right? But typically when we use the term partnership with customers, it's two lanes, right? And we're saying, listen, we're going to give here, you're going to give there, or let's just set the parameters. Let's agree to the ground rules of how we're a supplier to you guys going forward. And we really are. We aspire to be a partner with all of our customers. We certainly are a partner with our big strategic customers, and I would say most of our customers. I'd hope all. But I don't use that term lightly. Like when we say let's be partners, then that means we're in fact partners. I'm as invested in you meeting your build schedule as you are, and you should be as invested in being aware of what's going on with lumber pricing as we are, right? So let's kind of talk about these things and make adjustments to your budgets going forward.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you guys employ a pricing analyst. Mm-hmm. When I hear that title, obviously, I'm going to make some assumptions about kind of what they're doing day to day. I'm curious, how do they interact with executive leadership, with the sales team? Do they get involved with marketing at all? Just curious about the interplay from an interdepartmental standpoint.
Yeah, so the pricing analyst reports up through our one of our VPs, one of my VPs.
Okay.
And he has full visibility into the organization. He doesn't attend all of our senior leadership team meetings, but he has the ability to go to any one of our locations at Sunpro, meet with the manager, and then go through, do a pricing profile audit.
Okay.
And say, hey, listen, I've been auditing your profiles for each of your customers here, and I noticed that these profiles aren't up to date. Or I would recommend you. We just took a price increase from one of our EWP suppliers, and we make recommendations there. And so, where our pricing analyst is, there's a ton of value in this particular individual. He's made a significant impact at Sunpro. But we have a Monday morning market call every week. So the first thing I do when I come to work, it's at 9 a.m., but it typically lasts about an hour, and we go through what's happened in the lumber market and in other markets where we operate, like if we had insulation price increases or truss, what our lead time is. And so we cover the whole scope of it, but our pricing analyst, he has typically 15 minutes to sometimes a half an hour on that call to go through pricing analytics as it pertains to movement in the market.
Okay.
So we'll take what's happened in the market, and if there's been some significant adjustments, then we'll upload that into our costing system as part of our ERP, and then bump our pricing up. And then if we need to make adjustments to margins, we make adjustments to margin. But we're very reactive to the market. So the market's going up, we're making adjustments. The market's coming down, we're making adjustments. And he's the one that kind of develops the analytics and provides a whole bunch of data that he makes available to our location managers. And to answer, I think what you're getting at your question, he can meet with our managers, but our managers at each location, they're kind of a small business operator, the general manager, right? So they have responsibility for the P&L, for operations, for marketing, for everything that's kind of part of that business. And they can choose to take those analytics and make adjustments to their pricing, or say, you know what, my market's a little bit different. I'm going to hold off on uploading market and adjusting my cost upward because I think I need to stay in this area. So they still have the autonomy to do that. But if I'm a location manager, especially with as sharp as our pricing analyst is, anything he has to say, I'm going to think about really seriously and try and automate those updates.
How has this model changed how you develop and train outside salespeople for these interactions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say we have some of the best sales reps in the industry in lumber and building materials. What it does is we talked about emotionless pricing, but it also places a greater emphasis on relationship, but it places an emphasis on relationship with the sales rep and the customer within parameters.
Yeah.
And let me explain that. So let's say I grew up in high school and, now I'm a lumber salesman, but my buddy, or got a couple buddies that are, big time home builders in my market. We've lived in the same area forever. I want to make sure I take care of my buddies, right? We want sales reps to be able to take care of their buddies, but it has to be within the parameters of that pricing profile. So in the past, I'm not saying it's happened at Sunpro, but I'm sure it's happened somewhere or at some place, sometime. You want to give your buddy a deal. Well, you give your buddy a deal, and then we find out that one of our strategic customers at Sunpro has the same pricing as your buddy. Right. That's a big problem. Those are the conversations that I don't want to have, right? And so they have to operate within those parameters and justify, listen, is your buddy really buying $1 million in lumber on an annual basis? If not, then probably shouldn't be an H or a high for volume, right? And so it requires our sales reps to have great relationships, but also places it in a parameter where they really can't take advantage of their ability to price, outside the organization. And our sales reps and our managers have the ability to price. I mean, they have there's obviously they're basing it off of our cost coming out of our ERP, but they have the ability to adjust pricing as the market dictates.
Yeah. The other thing that we talked about that I thought was fascinating too is for a few of our clients, we went several months and kind of got into the analytics in kind of retrospect, trying to figure out year over year what their growth was that could be tied directly to inflation. So, hey, how much of this was just kind of the rising tide lifting all boats? And several of our clients, we went deep into sheet counts and we spent a lot of time. And I think overall, we thought it was a really helpful exercise. And several times we said, why aren't we doing this more consistently? We have other clients that were like, no idea, ain't got time for that. Let's just figure out how we save the money. And maybe we think about it 12 months from now. And I asked you, and you had a very specific answer. Can you go into how you measure for that, where you can say with extreme confidence, we know exactly how much year over year was tied to inflation because we do this? Yeah,
I appreciate it. It makes me sound better than we are. And that might be true. So what we did in 2018, I thought 2018 was a lumber anomaly, right? When the market went crazy, so to speak, but
quote unquote,
and then kind of normalized in 2019, and then 2020 and 2021 happened, and it makes me look, very uninformed calling 2018 an anomaly. So when 2018 happened, we realized, hey, listen, we grew by, I think it was about 35%, top line growth revenue, right? What percent of that was inflation? Mm-hmm. I mean, because we know there was a factor of inflation in that number, and so we went back all the way to 2015. And came up with two different metrics. One is a pound ship metric compared to cost. And then we have a pound ship metric compared to our revenue. Okay. So these two different graphs. And so if you were to look at the graph right now, going back to 2015 and really all the way until 2018, they're right on the cost, and the pound ship is about the same, right? So because there wasn't a whole lot of volatility. But in 2018, you'll see that the cost kind of separated a bit from the pound ship line. The pound ship line went up because we did see some growth, but most of that growth, 85% of that growth or so, was just pure inflation. So we look better, but we really are in fact doing a whole lot more business. And then 2020 and 2021, both are up significantly, but that gap between our pound ship line, it's up like this. They say it's kind of got a slight trend to it, but then, cost went like this. So there's this massive divergence and gap between the two of them. And we do our best to quantify that, but it's still kind of a soft approximation, but we can see graphically, listen, this is where we were from a pound ship perspective. We're shipping 26 million pounds of lumber last month, whereas a year from now, we shipped 19 million pounds of lumber, right? And then you take the factor that's different there and then say, well, what is the cost done in that period of time? And then, so for example, roughly last year, in 2021, we think we probably had in our numbers a little over $100 million in lumber inflation, meaning the cost had gone up about $100 million. And so if you finish the year at $450 million, really you finish it at $350 million from a pound ship perspective for your material, which was still up from years prior, but not up as much as our financials show.
Yeah. Was there a reason you guys went towards pound shipped versus, say, just sheer quantity, counts of things shipped? Is there just too many? Was it just simpler and faster?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I mean, in this space, it could be board footage, it could be square footage. There's a variety of different metrics, right? We went with that metric because we're looking at the three different items in our product offerings that are subject to inflation or affected by inflation. One is dimensional lumber and studs. The second is panels, so CDX, OSB, sheets. And then the third is engineered wood products. Mm-hmm. So I-joist, LSL, LVL, right? And they all have different weights to it. LSL is obviously, it's a manufactured item value. So we took those three product categories and then just weighed them out. So here's our panel weight, here's our dimensional stud weight, and here's our EWP weight. And then when you look at our graph, you've got you have one bar chart, but you've got EWP's weight, you've got dimensional lumber's weight, and you have panels weight. And then that's how we would track it going forward. And just doing it off on a pound ship basis made the most sense because you think about, square footage for one metric or board feet for another metric. We thought, let's just go with pounds. So it knows that's kind of the baseline that we're going to base it off of. That's what we've looked at. And then as we see fluctuations. So we do lose a bit of, do we ship a little bit more EWP in that number compared to dimensional, but typically they align. I mean, unless you're seeing some massive shift away from EWP to floor trusses, which we did because we had an EWP crisis. Everybody remembers in 2020 and 2021, we shipped a lot of that business to floor trusses or our in-house floor truss capacity. And so we saw that number shrink a bit, but we can see it, numerically and from a graphical perspective.
Yeah. Well, I want to switch directions a little bit on our discussion here as we think more about kind of your leadership style. Based on some of the things that we've talked about, I would guess as we think of you as a leader, it would be more of an analytical leader who really kind of maybe extends some of these concepts and how we quantify things and how we think about things, I would say genuinely differently than a lot of your peers locally, but also across the country. As you think about your own leadership style, maybe I think it's a bad idea generally for a podcast host to ask two questions at the same time, but I'm going to do that anyway. I think you can take it any way you want. Has your leadership style changed over time? And are you more of an analytical leader in terms of kind of your decision-making?
Yeah, I would say and this is going to sound trite, but I'm probably a people first leader. I mean, I want to make sure that the people within our organization and our customers understand what our position in the market is if you're a customer, and then what our position is in the market if you're an employee. So, and that's never changed. I think that's always been the case. But as time's passed, I've become probably much more analytics based. One, because of accessibility, it's easier to actually have dashboards and things like that. But two, with the volatility in the lumber market specifically, you've got to get a handle of analytics so you have an idea of what your inflation factor is and why your numbers are so upward so violently down. I report to a board of directors, and so obviously when they see unbelievable growth, which we've seen the last couple of years, it's on me to be able to explain, well, this is how much of it is inflation, this is how much is growth in a certain segment in a variety of ways. And the only way you get that data is through some pretty robust data analytics. And so I inherited this, but I love it. We have so we use BizTrack, as I mentioned. We have a dashboard, a BizTrack dashboard, where we track everything. And so if I'm a manager, I log in to BizTrack in the morning, I get to see my orders, invoicing, my AP, inventory position. I get to see negative on hand, my unapproved direct orders, my unresolved back orders, mismatched special order, outdoor special orders, outdated sale. I mean, just a plethora of data, probably a little bit too much, to be frank, but it's there. In front of you, even year-to-date stock adjustments, and then we have all of our sales data. And so, we're very data-driven, and it's typically dashboard-based because we try and move away as much as we possibly can from spreadsheets and have everything be either a smart view or you run a cube and access the data that you have and make decisions on that basis. But as the markets become more volatile and as data analytics has become more prominent, I would say I've certainly moved. It hasn't taken away from my people first focus, but we certainly moved to more of a data-centric approach to how we manage our business.
Is that a capability that you broadly have to train for? Because I often find folks who they want the data, they want to dive into it more so than you're just straight, how many orders, how many quotes do we got? What's my inventory? How many trucks do I have in? But I think my experience, there's an awful lot of folks who extremely knowledgeable, kind of grew up in the business, have been in for 30 years. But often when you start, I can tell you firsthand, as we are doing more on the analytics and thinking about that in our own business, let alone with others, sometimes folks are like, whoa, math, little crazy. I don't even know what analytics is, but it sounds aggressive. Well, they'll kind of back off. Within your team, is this a capability that you've had to develop or provide additional training for people to say is, hey, it's not too much, it's not too little, but this is the information that I need, and kind of develop the habits to think through, the broader trends and the impact on the business?
Yeah, I'd say it's mixed, but certainly it favors training. I mean, we hire, you come into this organization, you're already in this organization, and we launch another dashboard, another piece of our dashboard. Then we offer training on, what does negative on hand mean, and different SO metrics and stuff like that. So we certainly we train towards it. I think people in our organization have just become accepting of change. I mean, you got to change as time passes, and sometimes that change is I have more access to data, and people that are not data focused, it's a little bit frustrating because there's so much more to manage in their scope. But once you embrace it, it's actually helpful in kind of evaluating operational efficiencies, or why is my P&L, this particular line of my P&L look a little bit different this week, this month. So it's a mix. So some come just wired that way. Certainly some of the newer hires, the younger generation that spent most of their time in electronics, they embrace it. In fact, if you don't have that as a component in your organization, it becomes a little bit less desirable to come and work in an organization where you don't have dashboards and different analytics to actually inform decision making. And then you have kind of the older school perspective where been in the business for 40 years, back predates computers and stuff like that, and we respect that experience and respect that input, and try and take that input and put it into a proper system so everybody can benefit it, not just that particular individual and his or her customers. But one thing I will note, and I think this is a compelling example, when I came into this business, the perspective was you could only get a certain margin, gross margin in lumber, or a certain gross margin in truss, or millwork and doors. I mean, it was like fixed. And the moment you went above that, you were gouging your customer, or if you were below that, then you weren't within that where you should be, and the company and maybe the commissions weren't where they should be. And we quickly kind of cast that aside with analytics more than anything, saying, listen, who says that lumber can only be sold between a 50% and a 20% gross margin globally, when you have all these different cost structures and people buy differently, their cost base is different, their inventory is averaging up and down based on market, some's more aggressive, their turnover, instead of it being, we're roughly a month and a half, 2 months, Home Depot is a couple of weeks, right? On what basis? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we've kind of shifted that over time, where it isn't a fixed number, and we'll structure in some cases our costing system where you could price it at 20%, but it might be at a different price. And so we've been able to kind of create some flexibility and say, listen, I get where you're coming from, and we honor and respect that 25 years of your 40-year career of lumber's at a 20% or 20% margin, but the industry has matured. It's a little bit different now, and I think and they embrace it.
Yes, I have a common little game we play where we just try to identify some of these underlying assumptions, and we kind of go through different facets of the business. And one of them is on pricing. And oftentimes we kind of lean in slow. I kind of take them out to the right before bringing them back left. And I just talk about, hey, what are some rules of thumb? Like, what are the things that you have learned that just have held true? And a lot of these are very instinctual, and unraveling them to try to find where this came from.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to put my head through some drywall. Other times I just find it fascinating, just some of this logic. But I think, to your point, it's when you have the data that supports it, or the data shows that actually you have someone else, one of your colleagues, who just works 50 miles down the road, is selling at 7.5 points higher, and customers absolutely love them because of the overall value.
Yeah.
How can you present that information in a way that is less about me attacking you than just saying, hey, you look at the numbers. What do you think it says?
Yeah. And the platform we use for that, Bradley, in that transition, and we're past that now, was pricing profiles, right? You're saying this, we're objective. And so if you say it's 20%, then is that H, is that M, is that L? So we went through that discussion with them. But then also, let's talk about how Sunpro is unique in the market, right? We have 3 really core differentiators in our market. One is our rewards program, our blended marketing, our blended pricing, which is offered to strategic customers, and it's effectively a hedge, a market a risk hedge. And then we have our pricing profiles. And so I said, we're different in that way. And so whether that means we should charge a higher price or a lower price, whatever it is, but let's look at Sunpro's position in the market and not say it's 20%. It doesn't matter whether you're Home Depot, Lowe's, Sunpro, BFS, it's 20%. And it's not true.
Fast forward 1, 3, 5 years, you guys are different, as we've been talking about here. When do you think, if you had to pick a year, when do you think analytics using AI to try to find these correlations that a human probably would just never pick up on unless we tripped over it, when will that be something where you say, yeah, I'm talking in roughly at least half the, whether it's competitors, whether it's peers, roundtable folks or across the country, roughly half are doing some version of that with AI and analytics. What year do you think that might be in the future?
That's a hard question, Bradley. I mean, I certainly think it's coming. I don't know when it's coming, and I don't know what it's going to look like,
right,
from how it meshes with data analytics and how it affects organizations. But and this is kind of a roundabout way to answer the question. I know because labor is so tight, not just in lumber and building materials, but across the developing world.
Right.
Then anytime we're opening up 2 new truss operations this year, right? Well, we're trying to automate the process of making trusses as aggressively as we possibly can, right? It's not going to look like a Toyota Tundra plant where you have bots all over the place. But for every 3 people that we have in an old truss operation, there's 1 person doing the same duties. And so we're trying to hedge against fluctuation and unavailability in the labor market, and doing that through automation. And so AI obviously informs some level of automation, but as far as AI and coupled with data analytics, meaning I show up and I've got Siri already telling me, hey, Greg, this is what I suggest Sunpro do with pricing today. And this particular operation, they seem to be off, or they have too many SOs that are not at the margin requirement we have for special orders. It's coming. So I give it, technology is progressing quickly. I think, it's 2022 right now. By 2020, 2030, who knows, maybe half my job is going to be AI related. Just kind of show up and have the equivalent of 2030 Siri whispering in my ear what I'm supposed to do.
Life has a funny way of filling those voids for us.
Yes, it does.
Sure. There's a classic quote from John Maynard Keynes, who was, I don't know, this was in the early 1900s, and he's saying with all these productions and efficiency, the biggest challenge of the time in the second half of the 20th century is, what do we do with all this downtime? And then you're like, as it turns out, life finds creative ways to give us more to do. Maybe just to wrap up, I would love to hear, and maybe there's a thread to kind of your leadership style, or certainly how you've developed as an individual. You did a mission that took you to Siberia. When you first said that, I was kind of looking at you, through Zoom, trying to judge whether or not that was a joke. I got a friend who was talking about his mission, and he's talking about all these cool places all his buddies went. I said, where'd you go? He's like, Trenton, New Jersey. I'm like, oh no. That was my favorite one until you came along and tell me Siberia. So you spent a couple of years in Siberia. What was that like? What did you learn?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating. It caught me off guard too. I would have been happy with Trenton, New Jersey too. So when you go on, so this is a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So when you submit your papers, they call it, they ask a number of questions, and one of them is your language proficiency, right? Do you speak any languages, right? And presumably it's because if you're going to serve in a different nation, you already kind of know that language. I was born and raised in Toronto. And so I studied French for 8 years. It's required. I spent a little bit more than the required number of years. I come from a family that my mother was a French teacher. Anyway, so I thought I'd go and serve somewhere French speaking. My sister got called to Paris, France, and my brother got called to Bordeaux, France, and I got called to Siberia, Russia. Which this is back in I got my mission call I served in 1995 through 97. But I got it in 94, and this is before Google Earth, and so I pulled a map and figure out where Novosibirsk, Russia was, and realized that it was in Siberia. And so I'm from Canada, and so I should be pretty cold hardy, and I am to a certain degree. But yeah, I leave. You go to a 2-month long intensive language training program in Provo, Utah. So I'm from Toronto to Provo, Utah, and then from there to Siberia, Russia. And my experience on my mission was, I think anybody would probably have similar comments, but you learn a lot about yourself, right? You're with a companion, so you learn to kind of live with somebody, whether you like that individual or not. You're living together. You're kind of assigned to live with, and it changes as time passes. But I developed some interpersonal skills where you can't pick your friends because you're with somebody and I liked all of my companions for the most part anyway, so it wasn't a real big issue. But massive development of interpersonal skills. Wasn't innately a patient person, became a much more patient person as a result of serving there. And then you just, have a great deal of empathy for people and developing nations. And it's kind of weird to refer to Russia as a developing nation. It's obviously very developed in many ways, but in other ways, it's probably still developing. And
Right.
I served there in the 95 through 97, so they had just kind of emerged from being in the Soviet Union, and so it was unique. It was like living in the Soviet Union, and it was it's Siberia, so is it cold? Yeah, it's wicked cold. I mean, the coldest it got when I was there was minus 40 degrees centigrade, which is where the centigrade and Fahrenheit scales cross. But that's without the wind chill factor. You layer in wind chill, and it gets really really cold. But the range is huge too. In the summertime, it's really quite warm there. Getting the mid 80s, pushing 90s, and so, but much more humid than the Utah dry climate is, and more like back east where I was raised. So I kind of got a better feel for, what are my weaknesses, what are my strengths. Which, if you're going to be a good leader, you need to be aware of your weaknesses and your strengths. You want to certainly leverage your strengths as best you can, and do your best to make your weaknesses less apparent, or develop those into strengths. And so I learned a lot about myself in that period of time, and then it kind of informed my interest going forward. I came back, I got a degree in international relations, wanted to work for the Canadian government and the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, and didn't follow through completely with that, and eventually got into international business. And so I traveled all over the world before I came to Sunpro, specifically in Russia and Eastern Europe and the Middle East, with a different company that was owned by Weyerhaeuser, an international paper. And so my international experience, or my experience in Russia, kind of opened my eyes to this world. And when I came back, I thought, I don't want to, I come from a family of dentists. I don't want to be a dentist. I want to travel the world and do it in an international business perspective, or government. I kind of chose government, then I moved more towards business.
Well, I think sometime in the future, maybe around 2, I have kind of a working hypothesis with some folks that I've worked with who have been, I think, as leaders, exceptional in developing strong cultures within their organization, that in large part has been developed by living in different cultures and different languages and different cultures, and being around people for longer periods of time. So I'd be fascinated to kind of dig into that. Maybe one final question here for you, Greg, would just be around books. I'll take this any way you want it, because we traded. We'll have to talk too. We kind of talked about pricing books, and I sent you Confessions of the Pricing Man, which is a book on all sorts of different pricing that I found fascinating. You recommended Red Notice to me that I read, and I couldn't put it down. Any other books, either recently that you've read that you would say, hey, this is a great book, I'd recommend it, or maybe any book that you think back on your leadership journey that you've said, this book was really influential in helping me develop or think differently over the years?
Yeah, I mean, innately, if I get to pick what books I read, I gravitate more towards the Red Notice kind of book, or like, I just read this book about coming out of the ice, and it talks about a Jewish young man whose father was a communist. He went back to Russia during the Soviet period. Anyway, so fascinating adventure kind of reads that are based on true stories. That's where my real interest and passion is. And we talked about our mutual love of history. But from a business book perspective, I read those too. In some cases out of obligation, in some cases because I actually have genuine interest in it. But the most recent one that I've read, and we've actually studied as an organization here at Sunpro, is Extreme Ownership.
Okay.
Which is, I don't know whether it's a fad. It's been around for quite some time, but I love the concept of, extreme ownership, meaning, you come into an organization or whatever you're going to relate the principles of extreme ownership to in your life, and just have full accountability for what your sphere of influence is and what your area of responsibilities are. And I think we already did a pretty good job of that at Sunpro, but, never passing the buck. And even when maybe it isn't your fault, kind of, trying to find, where did I miscommunicate in some way, or where did I fall down, or where did I fail in this particular way? So extreme ownership is the one that kind of comes to mind. Good to Great has been around there for quite some time. There's a lot of books, but the most recent one, what I would say, it would be Extreme Ownership that I'd recommend to organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that mindset that if everyone can come to the table and say, regardless of what happened, good or bad, we had some role to play, and let's look in the mirror and talk about what that is. I think that's really powerful. And Jocko Willink, and that guy is such a charismatic and unique individual. I always forget Leaf, whatever his co-author. and partner in his consulting company. That has come
I
up.
wonder if that's their real
show.
voices too, because their voices are so perfect for the book and for their roles. I mean, their voices.
Yes. Oh, 100%. Greg, I know you're a very busy man. I appreciate you making time for this. I've really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for your time, Bradley. I appreciate you inviting me.
All right, friends, how did that go? I didn't overpromise, did I? Hopefully you picked up at least one or two things from my conversation with Mr. Greg Templeman. Our goal here is to make this the best podcast you listen to, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows, potential guests, or any sales fundamentals that you are struggling with your customers. Do not hesitate to email me directly at bradley@behindyourbacksales.com. And you can link up with me on LinkedIn or connect with me on Instagram at BehindYourBackCEO. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with your network and leave a review. Those mean more to us than you know. Again, thank you for Capital One Trade Credit, who brought you this episode today with Greg Templeman. If you are interested in increasing sales, decreasing risk, and leveraging a powerful tech platform to make it easier for your customers to buy from you, check out Capital One Trade Credit. And that, my friends, is all I've got. As always, thank you for listening. We're going to close out like we always do with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.